My ex-girlfriend who slept with my brother the day before our wedding contacts me 12 years later, a week before my wedding. But now I'm seeking revenge. I'm 38 years old, and in less than a week, I'll be marrying my beautiful girlfriend, who is 35, and we've been together for 4 years now. This will be my second engagement. 12 years ago, I was on the verge of marrying my ex-girlfriend, who was also 38. She had been my high school sweetheart, and we'd been together for almost a decade. We even lived together for 5 years, so naturally, I was ready to take that next step, and I believed she was too. My family adored her, so when I announced our engagement, they were ecstatic. But, of course, things didn't go as planned. Just one day before our wedding, my ex made a choice that would change everything. She ended up sleeping with my younger brother, who was 34, the night before the wedding. My ex asked me to spend the night at a hotel while she stayed home. She believed it would be bad luck if we spent the night together before the wedding, and I agreed to her request, but as luck would have it, I forgot my shoes at home, so I had to return to get them a few hours after I had checked in. When I got back home, I was shocked to find that the living room lights were off. My ex hated turning off lights when leaving a room, so that was unusual. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I headed straight to the bedroom where I'd kept my shoes, I noticed something that would forever haunt me. There, in my bed, was my ex with my little brother. Caught up in the moment, they barely even noticed me until I had been standing there for several seconds. I froze in shock, unsure how to react, and as soon as the reality hit me, I ran out. I drove back to the hotel in a daze, hyperventilating, and still refusing to believe what I had just witnessed. I was supposed to get married the next day. How could this be happening? It took me a while to compose myself, and when I did, I broke down in tears for at least an hour. Thankfully, I hadn't told my ex which hotel I was staying at, so she couldn't reach me directly. She could only text, and text she did, sending me a flurry of apology messages, trying to convince me that it was a one-time mistake. She claimed the wedding had been freaking her out, so she needed to blow off some steam, and that my brother had always been there for her, which is why she turned to him. I could hardly believe she was trying to explain herself after what I had seen. Without hesitation, I blocked both her and my brother, uninterested in any of their apologies. I spent the next few hours in a haze, canceling all the wedding arrangements. The money didn't matter anymore. My ex had just wasted 10 years of my life, and I wasn't going to stay in that mess for another second. The next step was calling my parents. They were confused. Should they console me or cut off my brother? I gave them some time to process everything, and as it got later, I ordered dinner and eventually fell asleep, exhausted from the emotional turmoil. After that day, I only saw my ex twice. Once when she came to pack up her things, and the second time a couple of years later at a mutual friend's party. She tried to speak to me, but I left as soon as I saw her coming. My brother and I haven't spoken since. Either my parents cut him off completely, and last I heard, he was working in Europe and hasn't been back for 3 years. That was all in the past, though, and I managed to move on. I'm in a much better place now and with someone I trust completely. Things were going great until just a few days ago, my ex reached out to me. I have no idea how she found out about my wedding, but she contacted me through a new Facebook account after I had blocked her old one. She sent a series of messages, expressing how devastated she was to hear that I was marrying again. Her message caught me off guard. She said, "Again," as if we'd actually been married, when in reality we never did tie the knot. Still, it felt like déjà vu, the way she pleaded with me to take her back. Claiming I was the only man she had ever loved, I showed my fiancé the messages, and part of me wanted to confront my ex, tell her off for reaching out before my wedding. But another part of me, the more unforgiving side, wanted revenge. I had handled everything maturely all those years ago, but now I felt the urge to make her feel the same heartbreak she had caused me. My fiancé, who has also been cheated on before, was completely on board with my plan for revenge. She understood my feelings and was eager to help me get back at my ex. Instead of just letting it go this time, we devised a plan to ensure my ex felt the pain I once did. So, a few hours after receiving her text, I replied, saying I was ready to talk. She immediately agreed and wanted to come over right away, but I told her to book a room in a nearby hotel, and I'd meet her there the next day, ensuring my fiancé wouldn't get suspicious. The next day, I met her at the hotel. When she saw me, she was overjoyed and even cried happy tears. But those tears wouldn't last long. She began explaining how sorry she was for what had happened over the past 12 years and how she wanted to make up for it. She claimed she didn't know how to reach out to me until she learned about my wedding, but I was ready for what was coming next. She begged me to text her one last time, telling me that if I didn't, she'd lose me forever. I listened to her with feigned interest, even pretending to care while holding her hands as she spoke. But in my mind, I was only waiting for my fiancé to show up. Almost 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door, and I rushed to open it. My fiancé entered, followed by all of our groomsmen and bridesmaids, all wearing masks of my brother's face. They even brought in a cake with his face smiling up at us. My ex was horrified, speechless, unable to comprehend what was happening. We all yelled, "Surprise!" while she stood there, frozen with a look of utter shock on her face. I'm sure no one could have seen this coming. We'd managed to convince the hotel staff that we were just surprising her, which wasn't hard to do since she'd already told them to allow anyone who wanted to visit her. Naturally, she had meant it for me, but I had other plans. Once the reality of the situation hit her, she started sobbing, mumbling incoherent words, but I wasn't about to let her off that easy. She had the nerve to message me a week before my wedding, despite what she had done. The day before we were supposed to get married, she slept with my brother. Now, she had to face the consequences of her actions. I told her she deserved every bit of this, that if she thought she still had a chance with me after everything, she was mistaken. She had no right to contact me after betraying me, and I was glad she was upset by what I had done. She brought it all on herself. I was harsh and cold when I said this, but she continued to cry and claimed that if I didn't want her back, I should have just ignored and blocked her instead of going to such lengths to humiliate her. But I felt no sympathy for her. Not then and certainly not now. I told her never to contact me again and walked out, leaving her crying in that hotel room. Now, with only 2 days left until my wedding, some of my fiancé's friends are demanding that I apologize to my ex. They think I was too harsh in how I confronted her, claiming that no matter what she had done, she didn't deserve to be treated that way. My groomsmen, though, don't share that view. They've known me since middle school, and they've seen how deeply the betrayal affected me. They understood how much I loved her and how devastating her actions were. To them, I had every right to do what I did. I'm sure my fiancé's friends were expecting some sort of high school drama they could gossip about, but this situation was far more raw and real for me. My fiancé supports me fully and doesn't think I owe my ex an apology. However, her friends are now refusing to attend the wedding unless I apologize. This has me torn. On one hand, I don't want my fiancé to be upset on our wedding day. She really values her friends. On the other hand, I don't believe I owe my ex anything. She had no right to re-enter my life, and none of this would have happened if she had just left me alone. Yet, she keeps trying to play the victim, sending me messages from spam accounts, claiming I broke her heart and that karma will catch up with me. I'm not interested in her emotional manipulation, nor do I want to deal with my fiancé's bridesmaids trying to guilt me into apologizing. I know she's never going to ask me to apologize just for her sake, but I feel some sort of obligation to resolve this. Time is running out, and I need to figure out what I'm going to do. Update. The responses to my dilemma have been pretty mixed, but with only a day left before the wedding, I decided to have an honest conversation with my fiancé. I explained how I was feeling, and as soon as I shared my concerns, she assured me that I absolutely didn't need to apologize to my ex, just because her bridesmaids thought so. If they were offended, they could skip the wedding. She told me that her bridesmaids had no idea what had happened between my ex and me. When she explained the betrayal, including the fact that my ex had cheated on me with my brother, they still couldn't comprehend the cruelty of what she had done and didn't believe it was something worth forgiving, so my fiancé gave up trying to explain it to them. She told them they didn't have to attend if they didn't want to, and hasn't spoken to them since. It's clear now that most of them are probably going to skip, and one even refunded the cost of the bridesmaid dress. My fiancé is putting on a brave face for me, but I can tell she's hurt. These women have been her friends for years, and I know it's hard for her, but she's standing by me. I've decided to talk to her friends directly and try to convince them myself. As for my ex, she's still making things difficult. Just a few hours ago, she called me and spent 15 minutes trying to argue with me. She's convinced that I'm still in love with her but too proud to admit it. Why? Because I went through all the trouble to humiliate her. She believes the fact that I held her hands while she spoke meant I was secretly longing for her. Yeah, I may have had some feelings for her once, but right now, they're filled with nothing but hatred and disgust. Still, she keeps trying to twist everything to fit her narrative. Honestly, the reason I even went through with all of that was just to shock her even more. I literally laughed in her face while talking to her, hoping she'd get the hint. but she just kept rambling about how we were soulmates and how I needed to call off the wedding before I made a huge mistake. The only reason I even entertained the situation was so that she didn't do anything stupid. I've been trying to get through to her parents to have them come take her away, but I haven't been able to reach them, so now I'm just waiting for them to respond. Once they do, I can finally get rid of her for good. Don't get me wrong, I still hate her, but I don't want her to hurt herself. I'm not that heartless. Update 2. So, we're officially married now. It's been a couple of days since the ceremony, and I still can't believe it. She's my wife now. I'm thrilled, but unfortunately, there's some sad news. Her friends ended up not showing up to the wedding despite all my efforts to get them to come. I personally called each of them to explain why I did what I did and why I wasn't going to apologize, but they didn't care much for it. Even when I asked them to attend for my wife's sake, they weren't willing to do it. It struck me as strange because I'd definitely attend a friend's wedding, even if I didn't particularly like the person they were marrying. I didn't learn the real reason why until yesterday when my wife finally confessed that she had a feeling her friends wouldn't attend. Whether or not I apologized, it had nothing to do with me, but with her standing her ground and refusing to give in to their demands, they didn't like that one bit. These were her friends from high school, and she'd somehow managed to keep them around because there'd never been anything serious to disagree on. But this was the first time their friendship was tested, and she chose me over them. They didn't like that at all. My wife admitted that she was a little upset by it, but was too embarrassed to admit it because, in the end, it all seemed juvenile. I didn't mind, though, because at least now I was sure it wasn't really my fault. Her friends were just self-centered. My wife even said part of her was glad they refused to come because now she could stop trying so hard to fit in all the time. She didn't have to seek their approval anymore, and she could live life on her own terms. That was a relief for both of us. Also, my ex's parents finally responded to me on the evening before my wedding. I had rushed to explain what their daughter had tried to do and how they needed to get to the hotel she'd been staying at to take her back home for her own safety. She was being psychotic and delusional, and I didn't think it was safe for her to be on her own. It turns out they had been on a hiking trip where they had no reception, but now that they were back, they promised to come take her home as soon as possible. They even thanked me for letting them know. I haven't heard from them since, but I'm guessing they got her back home safely. Update 3. Hi guys, it's been a week since my wedding and unfortunately, it's been nothing but drama. As I mentioned, my ex's parents hadn't been in touch with me since our last conversation, and I assumed they'd taken her home, but apparently they didn't. 2 nights ago, there was a knock at the door really late, and neither my wife nor I expected anyone. I made the mistake of opening the door without checking the cameras first, and when I opened it, my ex just barged in with her bags. My wife was sitting on the couch, and she literally jumped to her feet when she saw my ex. I was about to ask what she was doing in my house, but before I could say anything, she told me she was here to stay. She said that her parents had come to take her home a few days back, but she refused to go because she knew I'd eventually take her back. My wife and I were in shock, not knowing how to react to this whole bizarre situation. My ex went on, saying her parents had tried to force her to go back with them, but after a huge fight, she ended up staying at the hotel. Now, she was running out of money, so she decided to move in with me. She was convinced that if I spent enough time with her again, I'd be reminded of the past and fall back in love with her. I had no idea how to process this. It was so strange. My wife tried to speak to her, but my ex ignored her entirely, continuing to talk to me, demanding I let her stay. I tried to explain as gently as I could that I was married now, and she couldn't just show up and live here, but she told me that she didn't accept the wedding. In her eyes, we were still not married. I couldn't believe this was happening, but at the same time, I didn't have the heart to kick her out. She seemed so unstable, and I felt like she needed help. I told her to wait in the living room while I went to discuss things with my wife in the bedroom. Thankfully, my wife was sympathetic and agreed something was very wrong with how my ex was acting. She needed professional help, and we realized it. I tried reaching out to my ex's parents again, but they rejected my calls and sent a text saying they couldn't force her to come back and that she was clearly too unstable to live with them. They even said she was on her own now. It was shameful how they were just ready to abandon their daughter when she needed help. Left with no other choice, I called my parents, and they showed up within half an hour. My ex had fallen asleep on the couch by the time they arrived. We decided to take her to a therapist right away because at this point I had no idea what she was capable of. My wife and I allowed her to stay the night, not because we wanted to, but because we didn't have the heart to turn her away. It felt like something had snapped inside her mind, and the whole situation was just too sad to ignore. She needed immediate treatment, and the sad reality was that she no longer had her parents to rely on. The next day, my parents and I took her to the hospital. She was still rambling about how she was glad that I was finally coming around and even started planning our wedding. We tried to get her to see a mental health professional, but she refused, saying she felt perfectly fine. After a lot of struggle and complications, the doctors managed to calm her down with some medication, though I can't remember the exact names. Once she was calmer, she seemed to settle, and a couple of hours later, she said she wanted to go home. I brought her back to our place and we let her rest in a room while my family and I sat in the living room, trying to figure out what to do next. My wife and I felt a deep sense of relief when she said she wanted to go home, so we helped her pack her things into the trunk of our car and drove her back to her place. The entire car ride was silent, and honestly, we didn't know what to say. What could we say in a situation like this? Once we arrived, she apologized for all the trouble she'd caused and expressed how ashamed she was of everything that had happened. My wife and I felt incredibly awkward during the exchange, but we told her it was okay and advised her to take care of herself. Afterward, we drove home in silence, reflecting on everything. I wasn't sure if it would make any difference, but I decided to contact my ex's mother and filled her in on everything that had transpired. I think that finally made her realize the seriousness of the situation. She told me that she'd moved in with her daughter and promised to keep us updated. Despite everything that had happened, my wife and I truly hoped she would get better.